The show begins with Dr. Steven, who is an amazing genetic doctor. His groundbreaking work in nanotechnology could remove deadly cancers by changing the body's cellular construction when they're applied, which means eliminating harmful or destructive components. Now that's what I call great innovation. Dr. Steven presents his research at Claiborne University by presenting a sample of water that has been exposed to many artificial molecules. The condition of this water is extremely poor and filled with diseases. However, once he applies his solution, it starts to transform, assuming a completely new nature. Eventually, the process is finished, the bad molecules are eliminated, and a narration starts. It states that humans have always strived to fight off diseases that can kill us. But what happens when the cure becomes more terrifying than the disease itself? Now we're getting too philosophical. This innovation is a tiny device called Nanobots, capable of healing any injury or flaw in the human body. Steven, a scientist who can be somewhat of a tough guy and self-promoting, he is full of faith in his work. He takes huge pride in the hard work and brilliance that went into the creation of his project. However, like many very smart people, he's somewhat not aware of the miraculous nature of his nanobots. These nanobots are intelligent enough to replicate on their own and function independently. In his view, they will improve the imperfect human being that God created. I'm not sure it's always smart when these people want to challenge God's ideas, but let's see what happens. Dr. Norman is far from pleased with Steven's behavior and the fact that he is not acting like a true professional, particularly his shameful and egotistic comparison of himself to God. These guys never learn. Norman states that Steven must stick to the rules, reminding him of a previous incident where breaking the rules almost cost him his job and nearly led to shutting down the entire department. He warns Steven that he could lose the government funding he has been receiving for his project. Steven gets angry, saying that if his research is successful, the university could make millions from it. However, this is the only way his nanobots can be completed. Despite his frustration at having to wait for approval to conduct the live animal testing, Steven agrees to follow the rules for the sake of his project and the board of trustees. Steven's research on the potential of nanobots interests his friend and coworker Dr. Andy. Unlike Steven, Andy is a less self-centered and ambitious scientist. He is not only in a relationship with Steven's younger sister, Judy, but is also set to marry her in a month. Things are going well for Andy. Andy shares with Steven that he has proposed to Judy and asks him to be his best man. Steven, delighted by the news, shows Andy the nanobots and explains their amazing potential. After this, Andy leaves for his meeting with Dr. Katzman. Later that day, Andy consults Dr. Katzman about back pain he has been feeling and can't get rid of. The doctor returns with an X-ray result, telling him that they have found a mass in Andy's pelvic area, scientifically identified as osteosarcoma. Andy is devastated to learn that he has a form of pelvic cancer. Then, she tells him that this could either result in his death within about a year or surgery that would leave him without his legs. If you agree that these options suck for Andy, feel free to subscribe to the channel. In a desperate search for a solution to his terrible diagnosis, Andy demands Steven to tell him more about his nanobots. He is losing hope to learn that the board would never permit human trials without serious and safe testing, not even for terminally ill patients who are willing to participate due to the risk of potential legal repercussions. As Judy enthusiastically plans their life together as a wedded pair, Andy, having nothing to lose, secretly sneaks in Steven's laboratory under the cover of darkness and injects himself with the nanobots. The results are almost instant. In just 3 days, his tumor significantly reduces in size, offering him a fresh start to his life. His physician is left surprised and amazed by the sudden positive change in his health condition. It seems like a miracle. The positive outcomes continue as Andy wakes up one day to discover he no longer needs his glasses to see clearly. Thrilled, Andy rushes to his friend Steven to share the success of his nanobots. Despite Andy's earlier strong suggestions about the nanobots likely being ready for human trials, Steven is furious because of Andy's reckless behavior. Steven is pissed that Andy would jeopardize their lives and careers. However, Andy is confident that nothing will go wrong. He shows Steven a scar that has healed after being there for 20 years. Steven grows worried about the potential effects the nanobots could have on Andy's health and the risk of ending up in jail for being aware of an untested drug being used on another person. Andy reassures Steven, stating that he injected himself without Steven's knowledge, absolving Steven of any responsibility. Andy suggests that he could serve as living proof that nanobots work and proposes going public. However, Steven warns that Andy could be expelled from the university for messing around with a high-priority research project and possibly end up locked up in an unknown medical lab and used for constant testing for the rest of his life. Concerned about the potential harm the nanobots could do to Andy, Steven insists they be deactivated immediately. However, Andy resists, stating he's never felt better in his life and believes the nanobots are protecting his health. He expresses fear that if the nanobots are turned off, his cancer might return. Andy is not planning on changing his mind and won't allow Steven to deactivate them and wants to use this opportunity to validate his research. Eventually, they agree to conduct more tests to document the benefits and actions of the nanobots. The nanobots not only improved his vision and healed his scar, but also erased Andy's cancer. They boosted his health in numerous other ways too, making him more energetic and active with his fiancée. Steven starts a series of experiments to determine the full capabilities of the nanobots. Despite being underwater and unable to breathe, the nanobots keep Andy alive, enabling him to hold his breath underwater for at least 7 minutes. They allowed him to read nearly microscopic tests from a long distance, and Andy is feeling stronger like never before in his life. Andy even exposes his hand to a Bunsen burner, causing a severe burn, but the nanobots repair the damaged skin within seconds. He becomes emotional, expressing deep gratitude to the nanobots and Steven for improving his life. The following day, he goes jogging with his fiancée Judy and experiences almost no fatigue, surprising her as she knew he was unable to keep up with her in the past. However, his increased stamina and physical strength start to worry Judy, especially when he accidentally hurts her. Suspecting he's under the influence of something, Judy becomes tired and scared of his changed personality and leaves the apartment. The next day, Andy wakes up to discover the nanobots have formed gills on his neck, allowing him to breathe underwater. Steven, both fascinated and terrified by this development, tries to remove the nanobots from Andy's body immediately. However, his attempts fail unexpectedly, as the nanobots believe their program run is not complete. Steven theorizes that the nanobots are not responding to his command to exit Andy's body and deactivate because there are so many of them, and it would take time for the command to work. He advises Andy to go home and sleep, hoping they will be gone by the morning. The following morning, Andy finds that the nanobots have grown an additional pair of eyes on the back of his head. Steven arrives at his apartment shortly after and witnesses the new development, causing Andy to scream in horror. At the lab, Steven tries to disrupt the nanobots' communication by jamming the logic gate frequency, but this fails as they switch to chemical transmission. Andy suggests extreme measures like poison or radiation to deactivate them, but Steven dismisses these ideas, saying they would just kill him. Unable to deactivate the nanobots, Steven resorts to using high-intensity electric shocks, which are technically safe if properly regulated. He uses an ECT machine for safety and plans to deliver just enough direct current to disrupt the nanobots. He assures Andy that it will only hurt for a few seconds and gives him an object to bite down on to prevent him from biting down on his own tongue. As he releases the first shock, he sees a significant decrease in the nanobots in Andy's body on the computer, so he continues with a second and a final third shock to completely remove them. However, the last attempt nearly kills Andy, causing him to go into cardiac arrest before the nanobots revive him. When Andy regains consciousness, he asks Steven if their plan was successful. Steven informs him that the nanobots are still inside him. Their process slowed down, but they have already started replicating, and it's only a matter of time before they're back in full force. Andy suggests repeating the electric shock, but Steven disagrees, saying Andy is too weak for another dose of electricity and is hesitant to prepare him for further electric shock because he is scared he might kill him. Steven encourages him not to give up and assures him that they will find a way to kill the nanobots. However, Andy starts to accept that dying might not be so terrible. I don't blame him for thinking like this. Back at his apartment, Andy experiences a choking incident while eating, and his anxiety becomes worse as his hearing becomes extraordinarily sharp when the phone rings. The caller is Judy, who wants to know where he is. He barely mentions being at the university. She expresses a desire to discuss several questions before their wedding and proposes to visit him. Terrified, Andy declines, telling her it's not a good time. He reassures her that everything is all right and that he's very tired. He expresses his love for her and wants her to remember that. Later, Steven visits Andy's apartment to check in on him. Andy, fully clothed and looking distressed, opens the door. Steven is shocked to discover that the nanobots have shielded Andy's body from both external and internal threats with a layer of nematocysts, looking like those of a jellyfish and additional ribs. The nanobots seem to be making a barrier against Steven. Steven tells Andy to get dressed and meet him at the lab. At the lab, Steven conducts an X-ray scan and observes the nanobots have doubled in the protection around Andy's body. Andy admits that he doesn't blame Steven, but himself for opening up Pandora's box. Well, you don't say, Andy. Glad you realized that. In a desperate attempt to end his suffering, Andy grabs a knife and points it at his stomach. Steven tries to stop him, suggesting they could go public and look for help for him from scientists from around the world. However, Andy refuses, not wanting to be remembered by his fiancée Judy as some sort of freak. He apologizes to Steven and stabs himself with the knife. A few seconds later, the knife begins to leave Andy's body on its own, and Andy continues to breathe, showing that the nanobots have revived him once again. For the love of science, he can't even kill himself. Bad luck for Andy. Andy reflects on the irony that just 2 weeks ago, he would have given anything for a new chance at life. He got exactly what he wished for, but now he's desperate to die. He's frustrated with his current physical state and upset about his inability to die, no matter what they do. He tells Steven to end his suffering by suggesting that he should increase the electrical voltage to kill the nanobots. Steven is unable to deactivate or remove the nanobots, and Andy wishes to die to prevent his fiancée from seeing the monster he's become. With no other options, they sadly agree to inject Andy with a lethal dose of electric current to destroy both him and the nanobots. A heartbroken Steven apologizes and presses the button that electrocutes and kills Andy. Afterwards, Steven destroys the remaining nanobot samples one by one and destroys his laboratory along with all the evidence of the event. Sometime later, Judy is at Andy's apartment collecting his belongings when she accidentally drops a framed photograph of her and Andy. As she cuts her finger on the shattered photograph, the wound heals instantly, implying that at least a few of the nanobots have transferred to Judy during their sexual intercourse. The moral of the story reminds us of the famous saying, "A healthy person has 1,000,000 wishes, and a dying person has only one wish." Andy had a wish that we all would have wished for ourselves if we found out that we were dying. The main problem of this story is that the nanobots' treatment was very dangerous and untested, but Andy still wanted to go through the process no matter the cost. And in the end, it turned him into a scary monster. And when everything went to hell, he wanted to kill himself because the whole situation went too far. Let's hope that in the near future, there will be a global cure that will cure any person in the world who has a dangerous disease, without turning them into a monster, of course. Thank you, and see you in the next video.